Trump. Your thoughts? Next election coming in U.S. with everything that's going on.
Well,
You think there's a
when I
likelihood?
watched what happened in the United States with Trump and Clinton, I thought people liked the unscripted, impulsive lies of Trump better than the scripted, instrumental lies of Clinton.
What do you mean by that?
Well, Trump gave a different speech generally when he went from audience to audience. He kind of shoots from the hip, kind of, a lot. And it isn't obvious to me that shooting from the hip is really the right way to lead a country. But calculating everything beforehand for maximum impact on your political future, that is also not a way to run a country. And that's how you get pulled into politics by handler, by PR, by opinion poll, by image. We have, you see politicians, we have to protect our image. It's like, really? Do you? You have to protect your image, do you? What's your image exactly? Well, it's what we want people to think we are. Well, how about you be that instead of being the image of that? And you see this dialogue taking place. People don't even notice it. It's like, we have to protect our image. Yeah. It's like, Rogan doesn't protect his image. He doesn't have an image. He's actually there, which is why people are listening to him, or come up with some other excuse. He's a gateway to the alt-right. It's like, really, this left-leaning person with high degree of sympathy for socialist views on the working class site, who's a psychedelic experimenter, hippie, countercultural person, is a gateway to the alt-right. Really, that's
Rogan
your story.
You're talking about.
Yeah, of all the stupid stories,
right.
It's so ridiculous. The only way you could possibly believe that is if you knew nothing about him. Here's my dilemma with Trump, one of many. He's beating the election was stolen drum pretty damn hard. And I look at that as an outsider again, because I'm Canadian, and I think, well, you Americans, you've been split 50-50 for like 5 decades, like right down the middle, eh? And there's always election trouble, because no system is 100% perfect. Maybe there's like a 1%, 2% margin of crookedness, something like that. And you're probably really not going to get rid of that. Maybe you can maneuver carefully to keep it so that it's never any more than 1 or 2%. But to get rid of that last bit of malfeasance and deception and corruption would take such a heavy hand that would become worse than the problem. And that's a real problem when you're split 50-50, because small election irregularities can throw the whole election. Okay, so it isn't obvious precisely what can be done about that. But the election was stolen narrative, I think it's weak for a variety of reasons. The first is, it's pretty whiny. Like, why didn't you win with a 5% margin then? So how do you know this isn't your fault? And you think the Republicans aren't gerrymandering congressional districts? Because they are. And so it's not obvious that even if it is the case that there is substantive election fraud, that it's all from one side. And so there's that. And then, you're sure that's the message you want to be sending people? That they shouldn't have faith in their most fundamental institution? You might be right, but it's in your interest for that to be true. And so that's a moral hazard. And then, well, what happens when you retake the House? Because that's what's going to happen. I think the Democrats are going to get stomped in the upcoming election. Are those elections somehow valid, but yours wasn't? And so why magically when the Republicans get elected, that's honest, but when they don't, it's not? And so doesn't that take the wind out of your story? It's like, well, it was stolen. Well, you have the House and the Senate. How do you account for that? So that, to me, that's going to weaken that narrative. Trump is capitalizing on anger. He's using the election issue as a means to an end. And he may believe it, but it doesn't matter because it's a weak story, especially when the Democrats lose the House. It's a weak story. So it doesn't have any momentum. But then it's worse than that, because I also think, and I've talked to lots of Republicans about this, is that the best story you've got? You got tradition on your side. You got the truth as an adventure on your side. You got belief in truth on your side. That's been abandoned by the radical left. You've got belief in science on your side. You've got responsibility on your side. You've got the fundamental purpose of higher education on your side. You can't conjure up a better story for Americans than the election was stolen with all that on your side. That's just not very impressive. And I have sympathy for politicians in general in the United States. Congress people have very hard jobs. It's not a job I would like. I don't think it's a pleasant job. They spend a lot of their time fundraising, 25 hours a week, on the phone, out of their congressional offices, because otherwise they're not supported by their party leadership. 40% of them sleep in their offices when they go to Washington. They don't even have apartments. Those that do usually have little bitty apartments. Their families aren't there because it's hard to get families to move to Washington now with dual career families. They don't have much of a social group. They have to run for their job every 2 years. This is not a, plus they're under attack all the time and they're micromanaged and microscheduled. So.
But I'm curious, what point are you trying to make? Are you trying to make a point with Trump saying the fact that, you know, election was stolen? Because that's exactly what Hillary Clinton's position was for 4 years. That elections was stolen from her, right?
No better when she does it.
Oh, no, I'm not even. What I'm trying to say is I looked at it as a weak position. That,
it is a weak position.
It is a weak position she was taking. I think, okay. But
that's the worst of it. It's like, really?
Where are you going with this? Are you going with the fact that...
Tell a better story.
Tell a better story if you want to get reelected? Is that
No. The way to reelection is through a better story, but that's not the reason to tell it. The reason to tell it is because you believe it. And for the first time in my life, really, I believe this to be the case, conservatives really have something to sell to young people. And they can sell the meaning of responsibility. Because young people are bereft of meaning. And most people find meaning in responsibility. And when the right talks about responsibility, they kind of do it in that finger-wagging way that makes conservatives unpopular among young people. You should be responsible. It's like, yeah, you should. Why? Well, because your life is chaotic and meaningless and you're stuck in this juvenile surreality. And it's really painful for you and you're anxious and aimless and goalless. And then you look at people who have a life, because maybe you could have a life, and you think, well, what does that life consist of? It's like, well, you have a committed, intimate relationship. There's one. You have friends that you're honest with and playful with. Mm-hmm. So you have a group of friends. You have a job or a career. You know, you learn how to use your life, your time outside of work in a productive, engaging way. You regulate your susceptibility to the multitude of hedonistic temptations that are in front of you. You pay some attention to your mental and physical health. You make a goal, some goals for the future that are concrete. Well, there's 7 things you can do. They're all responsible things. Why? Because then your life will have some meaning. Now, you might say, well, what's the ultimate meaning? It's like, get those things straight first. They're not nothing. And maybe you won't be so damn miserable and bitter and resentful and angry and aimless and anxious and frustrated and disappointed and ashamed if you had 5 of those 7 things going well. And the conservatives can make that case. No, bloody left isn't making that case. It's like for them, responsibility is pretty much equivalent to totalitarian patriarchal oppression. And the conservatives could just take that and say, no, our institutions, they're pretty solid. Maybe if you don't like what's happening on the political front, you join a group, a church, the Elks, the Rotary, some civic organization. Get in there and do your part. Why? Not because you should, even though you should, but because, well, why not meet some people who are like-minded and have a social group? And
you think Biden can have the kind of impact to push people away from the political party to the opposing side, similar to how Goldwater and what they did back in the days on how civil rights was handled when Barry Goldwater did what he did, and next thing you know, African Americans went from only 60% of them voting Democrat to 92% 4 years later. They went from 60% to 92% 4 years later in the next election. And Republicans haven't had a chance on the African American vote since 1964. Do you think the current climate is that big of a climate where the conversion from one side to the other side to say, listen, I don't agree with you guys on censoring. If the guys want to talk, leave them alone. The way you handle COVID by shutting everybody down, I don't agree with that. Constantly printing money, I don't agree with that. Do you think it could be something where it could flip that big?
I don't know, because the next presidential election in this climate is a long way away. Because you know, who can predict the future even a year out, especially given the rate of technological change that we face now? I mean, you don't even know what's happening today. There's so many technological transformations just today, many of which have world-shaping consequences. God only knows where we're going to be by the time of the next presidential election. But it certainly does seem to me the case that the Democrats are going to lose big in the fall. And so, you know, that's what we'll focus on for the time being.